But in 1995, a religious group known as the Autocusi, or the Israelites, decided that this tropical rainforest would be its promised land. They came to settle and to introduce farming to the Amazon soil. Their prophet Ezekiel Autocusi told them they would be Peru's living frontiers in the forgotten regions of the country that form the so-called triple border with Colombia and Brazil. Since then, the Autocusi have lost their leader. With almost another halfway to go, we met our first member of the Autocusi church. It was pretty easy to spot her.
Es el gran rey de los reyes, aunque el mundo no lo crea. Amén. Demos gracias a Jehová.
This is a community that has separated itself from Peruvian society. They dress in biblical clothes, biblical costumes, and really they are isolated as they attempt to sort of establish their presence permanently on the Amazon as they conquer the Amazon rainforest. The riverboat left us on the dirt pier of Altomonte. The self-confessed Israelites are a peaceful people, but they are not exactly welcoming to outsiders. We had heard that every Friday they hold a ceremony on the banks of the river. Their spiritual capital is here in Altomonte, founded 20 years ago by people answering the call of their prophet Ezekiel to populate the borders of the Amazon.
Todos los israelitas somos trabajadores. Trabajaremos codo a codo en el agro para llevar a cabo con el desarrollo agropecuario.
They migrated from all across Peru, many fleeing economic hardships or the internal war with the Maoist guerrillas' shining path.
Que vengan todos aquí a Alto Monte de Israel para que así trabajen junto con nosotros y así aprendan muchas cosas así que en la selva. ¡Viva el proyecto de Fronteras Vivas!
The fog lifts, revealing that the Israelitas are not a handful of eccentrics in a small jungle village, but a large movement of about 50,000 believers from all sectors of society. Although their national culture has known many upheavals, the Israelitas have no tradition of violence. They advocate social change, but only when achieved by peaceful means. The Israelitas believe in Jesus the Savior, yet they follow the law of the Old Testament. For them, it's not only a book of law and ethics, but also a source of stories, recipes, and survival instructions. The women wanted to know if their sisters in the far-off land of Zion also wear kerchiefs. The men inquired whether Israelis also have long hair and beards the way they do. Detachment from the outside world dictates an independent way of life for the Israelitas. The jungle is a paradise where they can raise their own food and tend to all their needs. The overwhelming presence of the prophet Ezekiel Autocusi Gamonal is conspicuous everywhere. The Israelitas are also a political movement. In the last elections to the Peruvian Congress, they even won a seat in the legislature. According to the prophet Ezekiel, the New Testament declares that God's covenant with the Jews has been abrogated and will be renewed with another nation in a virgin land situated in the center of the world. Every child knows that the center of the world is Peru, and what land could be more virgin than the jungle? The Israelitas don't go anywhere without their Bible, in a zipper binding to protect it from tropical rains. They quote the Bible on every occasion, and their expertise approaches that of rabbinical scholars. At the village school, Bible is the most important subject of all. The Israelitas claim that the Bible justifies their unique lifestyle, proves Ezekiel's authenticity as a prophet, and confirms that they are the chosen people.
En este caso, hemos creído en la palabra, en el Evangelio, lo que dice el libro de Efesios, en el capítulo 1, versículo 13. Nosotros, que somos profesores, enseñadores, y netamente israelitas, muy distintos a las otras escuelas que están fuera de nuestro asentamiento, de nuestra comunidad, nosotros hemos decidido abrazar esta carrera de la docencia para tratar de conservar las costumbres que la Biblia indica. Ese es el principal motivo de que aquí hay profesores netamente hermanos israelitas.
The village is run democratically. Decisions are made by the village council and a committee of elders. The prayer hut is walking distance from the village. Other huts were built around it to serve the community on holidays. Nearby, villagers constructed an elegant guest house for their revered prophet, who honors them with occasional visits. The Israelitas pray 5 times a day. They participate in pilgrimages on the holidays of Tabernacles, Passover, and Pentecost, observe the sanctity of the 7th day, and do not place graven images or icons in their houses of prayer.
Nuestro pan cotidiano y perdónanos, así como nosotros perdonamos a nuestros deudores. No nos metas caer en tentación, líbranos de todo mal, porque tuyo es el reino, el poder y la gloria por todos los siglos. Amén. Bendito Jehová Altísimo Señor.
The Israelitas have many differences of opinion with mainstream Christianity. For example, they believe that Jesus was born on April 6th, as it is written that he was circumcised on the Sabbath following Passover. Today, there are dozens of Israelitas communities in the jungles. In the future, the prophet plans to disseminate his doctrine throughout South America, gradually bringing his message to all humankind. Many Israelitas who live in the city of Pucallpa, further down the river, plan to move to the jungle villages before the catastrophe of the year 2000. Israelitas come to the movement's club to watch the prophet's sermons on video, the Mount Sinai of the 20th century. The Israelitas' political party is called FREPAP, a Spanish acronym for the Peruvian Popular Agricultural Front. Their symbol is a fish, recalling Jesus' first miracle before the fishermen at the Sea of Galilee, and the age of Pisces that mankind is now experiencing, to be followed by the age of Aquarius, the era of cosmic love. We ought to meet the man who claims to have seen God on 3 occasions. Ezekiel's hometown is a very important ritual site. Here, the 3rd temple is under construction. The Israelitas believe that Peru is the new Zion. Here they are building their temple according to the prophet's precise plans. Under the difficult political conditions, numerous accusations have been leveled against the prophet, and contributions have declined, slowing down construction.
Lamentablemente acá en nuestro país hay muchos intereses políticos, muchos intereses por parte de inversionistas. Nosotros en absoluto nunca hemos tenido ningún problema con la comunidad judía. Lamentablemente el dueño del canal profesa la religión judía y para ellos es algo deshonroso que nosotros llevemos esa congregación Israel como una doctrina. Es por eso que tuvieron una finalidad de desmantelar, desequilibrar toda la institución. Gracias a Dios hemos logrado contrarrestar toda esa campaña. Ahora se está descubriendo que todo es falsedades.
This is the prophet Ezekiel. Can we recognize a holy man? Do not steal, do not lie, and do not be lazy. These are the 3 basic ancient laws of the Indians. Ezekiel added another 10 commandments.
No lo hacen lo que dice. Entonces así estaba informando. En eso, claro que vi, entonces el Espíritu Santo me dice, siéntate, me dice, y me senté. Entonces el Padre se levanta y me dice, primero me dice, Ezequiel, anda a la biblioteca, sácame una cartulina, me dice. Y yo entregué, entonces me dice, siéntate en la mesa y vas a escribir los 10 mandamientos. Pero en un momento me dice, entonces, está en el cielo. Él es alto, un poco más alto, pero maceta.
Is this genuine faith or mere mass hypnosis?
Juntaos todos vosotros y oíd. ¿Quién hay entre ellos que anuncie estas cosas? Jehová lo amó el cual ejecutará su voluntad en Babilonia y su brazo en los caldeos.
¿Ah?
Su brazo.
Ahora va a conocer el brazo.
The Israelitas observe all biblical commandments. These newborn infants will be blessed and then registered in the community records, a spiritual substitute for circumcision. Although they consider themselves Christians, the Israelitas have many Hebrew customs. They observe a fast one day a year and call God by his explicit Hebrew name. Every Saturday, holiday, and the first day of each month, the Israelitas offer sacrifices, meticulously observing all mandatory ritual purity practices. Sermons at the prayer hut take on a kind of Hyde Park atmosphere. It is difficult for us to understand the flow of associations that brings the speaker from one quotation to another. But what's most important is that the audience follows his logic.
Santifica al hombre que guarda el sábado, el que guarda con conocimiento de causa, el que aplica su profundo sentido de responsabilidad cobra.
Their powerful love for their Bible, people, and soil is indeed impressive. Perhaps Ezekiel underwent an experience similar to that of Moses when he beheld the burning bush. It's hard to determine. What has changed since the days of Moses?
Kahala Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai Ba'Shem Ruach HaKodesh, which are the true Hebrew names of the Most High Father, Yahweh, which is Hebrew for He is, and His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, which is Hebrew for He is salvation, He delivers. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, with the house of David reborn again in this generation. And shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, who are known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about the tribe of Asher, and we're going to get into how today the tribe of Asher makes up the Colombians, Bolivarians, the Brazilians, the Ecuadorians, the French Guianans, the Guyanese, the Peruvians, the Surinamese, the Ugarians, the Paraguayans, and the Venezuelans. But before we get into that, let's read this. This is Romans 10:2. For I bear them record that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. The tribe of Asher is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Asher, when you get into who he was and who he came from, you could go to this infograph here and you can see that Asher comes from the wife Ziplah, who was Leah's handmaiden. Okay, so our forefather Jacob had laid with Ziplah, and from Ziplah comes Asher. Now Asher, his direct brother, or his closer brother I should say, is Gad, that of the Native American Indians. This is why these two nations, they have similar traits as far as their phenotype, how they appear. Now Asher, like I said, basically makes up the northeast part of the South American continent. Okay, like I said again, the Colombians, Venezuelans, the Guyana, let me zoom in here real quick, Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador. Okay, these are the Asherites. And the video we just watched was a combination of multiple videos referencing the Israelite movement in Peru. Now, this Israelite movement, namely, is located right here in the top of Peru, but it basically takes in all of the people from up here. Okay, there's a lot of Brazilians and Colombians, Venezuelans in this organization. Now, first and foremost, I want to make it clear that though what we watched was very moving and it was beautiful to watch, that our people are coming back to our knowledge, unfortunately, those people do not have the full truth. Okay, and that's because they had incorporated man-made religion into their truth. Now, they had some of the truth, but not according to knowledge, right? You've seen in that video that they were eating rabbits, that they had long hair because they believed God had long hair. But I wanted to show that because in South America, there is a heavy zeal for God, and that's because they are the Israelites, okay? Another example of this would be this sect here in, I believe this is in Colombia. It says, Lost Jews of Colombia say they found their roots. They are called crypto Jews or lost Jews, and in recent years they have emerged in remote places as scattered as India, Brazil, and American Southwest, and here in Colombia. They were raised as Christians but believe they have discovered hidden Jewish roots, prompting many to return to Judaism. Now, remember, Judaism is not the biblical Israelite belief or way of life, right? This is a man-made doctrine created by our enemies, the Amalekites, which are the top tribe of Edom, back around 740 AD, when they mass converted to a new religion which they created, which was based off of our heritage. Because again, at that time, we for the most part had become a lost nation, and that let the door right open for our enemies to come in and start to claim themselves to be, Jews. For the most part, Amalek always claimed that they were converts up until the 1800s, when they started to just straight out claim that they were the biblical Jews, which the world is now starting to realize that they're not. Well, let's get back to this. It says, many say their ancestors were Sephardic Jews. Now, Sephardic Jews, if you're unaware, are the Israelites of the southern kingdom that fled into the world after the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, they went up to Europe, they went down to Africa, they got taken to Rome as slaves, like I said, and eventually came up and took over Rome, and then that eventually led to the creation of the Middle Age Europe with the Byzantine Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. Well, a lot of the higher echelon of that society, which was namely Jake, right? They did know that their roots did go back to Israel, but they didn't really get the fine details of how. Right? They just knew that they were simply children of God, right? And some of them claimed that they were from the house of Judah and whatnot. Well, those would be referred to today as the Sephardic Jews, right? The scattered Jews. It says, many say their ancestors were Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain more than 500 years ago, as the Spanish crown embarked on a systematic persecution of the Jews. Now, this here is a little tricky because in the Middle Ages, Jake basically was in power of Europe during the Dark Ages. They refer to it as the Dark Ages, Middle Ages. Let me bring the Bible timeline, which will make this a little easier to explain. So what happened is, like I said, 70 AD, you have the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, okay? And 1 million Israelites, it's estimated, fled into Africa. And these ultimately stayed there and ultimately were taken into slavery through the sub-Saharan slave trade, and would eventually become Moors, or just got scattered throughout the Silk Road exchanges all the way throughout the East, all the way to Japan, which is why you hear about like the black samurai and the black Chinese. but the other Israelites who ultimately got taken to Rome, which you could read about in the historic accounts of Josephus, they eventually came up in society. They won or bought their freedom, and they eventually came up. Nerva was one of these Israelite who had became Romans and had come up. There's a movie, an old ancient Hollywood movie back in the 50s. It was called it had a number, like a Roman number to it. It was an old big time Roman movie where Nerva was one of the generals in that movie. But of course they depicted him like an Edomite. But Nerva was the first so-called black emperor. Well, after Nerva made emperor, that sort of opened the door for Jake to be emperor. Now eventually you have this emperor called Septimius Severus. Septimius Severus was the first so-called black man or Israelite, right, of the southern kingdom of prominence who basically took over Rome, okay? And when he had taken over, the reason why he's called Septimius Severus is because he had killed the 7 previous emperors, right? Basically Septimius Severus means a cutter of 7. And here you can see, fresco of him and his 2 kids. One, got erased out of it, but you can clearly see he was so-called black man. Well, eventually what happened is the line of succession goes down, and you then get the Judite or Southern Kingdom Israelite Constantine the Great, who comes in, rearranges Rome, and basically establishes a one God worshiping order, and he also sets up the Vatican. Now this eventually made it, for the most part, a hostile environment for these Edomites, kind of just how America is becoming hostile to these so-called white people, right? They're feeling persecuted, and eventually they fled up to the Caucasus Mountains. Well, that being said, Jake, being left to his devices in Rome, he ultimately had he had split up the empire into the Byzantine Empire and the Western Roman Empire, right? Which eventually I believe was the Holy Roman Empire and stuff. But from there also comes the establishment of the Sunday Sabbath, the rosary beads, church or mass, right? Like I said, Esau had gone up to the Caucasus Mountains. The Vatican had created the idea of hell. Like I had told you, the Southern Kingdom Israelites, for the most part, that had gone into Africa were starting to get picked off by Ishmael and Ham, the Hamites, and sold into the sub-Saharan slave trade, and eventually were sold to on the Silk Road. Well, that being said, you had the we finally get to the point of why I went through all that history, right? You get to 7040 AD, where you had Amalek, which is the top tribe of Edom, right? Which were those pagan Romans that had fled up to the Caucasus Mountains and stayed there for about 1,000 years. But they had slowly started to come out. Now, Amalek himself, he settled in the base of the Caucasus Mountains, known as Khazariah. And he, while he was there, was a fucking devil. And what he had done is he had started to, they were known as the name stealers. They were known for robbing people, basically getting them drunk, giving them drugs to make them pass out, and eventually they would steal their identity, kill them, and go and pretend they were them and steal their goods, or take whatever money was waiting for them at the end of their journey, right? There was accounts of testimonies on both the eastern side of China about these people, and also on the European side, warning about these people. Again, they were referred to as the name stealers, the pagans, but eventually they were a big problem for the caliphate, right? The caliphate during that time was Ishmael, and Ishmael had given Ishmael, along with the Byzantine Empire, which was Jake, had given the Khazarians ultimatum that ultimately they convert to a God-centric religion, either Islam or Christianity, or they would be destroyed. Well, they eventually decided to go with another religion, a religion of their own, based off of the heritage of the, by then, lost Israelites, okay? And they then took that upon themselves. Now, eventually, 200 years after they had converted, the Russians, back then known as the Rus, had come in and destroyed the Khazarians, okay? And when that happened, a lot of these Khazarian Jewish people fled into Europe because that's where their Jewish brothers were at, right? They knew that the houses of the elites and, you know, the Spanish Empire, and that they were, and also Europe, that they traced their lineage back to Israel. So these converts, these Amalekite converts, decided to go into Spain because they could meld in with their fellow, religious brethren. Okay, but what had happened is Amalek did what Amalek does, and he started to destroy the civilization. Right, this is where you get the Black Death and stuff. Right, the plagues that came in. A lot of people had claimed, and with very good allegations and evidence, that Amalek and these Edomites were basically poisoning wells and rivers and causing tons and tons of disease on purpose, and that ultimately led to 1/3 of 20 million people in Europe dying, right? Basically a third of the people dying off, and that again opened the door for Edom to come back into power. And when they came back into power, that's where you had the Renaissance come in, right? And when the Renaissance came in, these devils basically rewrote all the paintings, the history, everything that they could get their hands on there in the land of Europe, right? They covered the faces of the judges, okay? Now, that being said, when this started to happen, they started to come into power. You still had these devils like the Medicis, the Edomites infiltrating the Vatican. Well, the Spanish was getting tired of Amalek's shit. So what he started to do is he decided to expel all the Jews, right? And when he was going to expel the Jews, he was talking about expelling the Khazars, right? And basically getting rid of everybody who believed in Judaism, right? Or basically what the so-called Jewish people believed in that time. And that is where the persecution of the Jews came from. Now, a lot of people of our nation, right, the Israelites, that came from the southern kingdom of Israel, they fled Spain, okay? And a lot of them, when they fled Spain, they came to the New World. This is why Columbus, he brought over a lot of translators. I think it was like 5, and then even the voyages after that, a lot of the Jakes who were still practicing their heritage, right, that of the Israelites, they came to the New World, and a lot of them settled amongst the other nations here, okay? So that's why, we say that a lot of when the Europeans came over here, right, they weren't all, Edomites. A lot of them, there was a lot of Israelites amongst them, a lot of Israelites from the southern kingdom, which had already mixed in and had basically mixed in with the other nations around, and for the most part looked like Spanish people, Mexicans, okay? And we could see this by looking at this, right? This here is a painting of the kings of Peru, or I'm sorry, the Inca Empire, okay? Because again, all these kingdoms here, for the most part, all descend from in the southern America, descend from the Inca Empire, okay? The Inca Empire was mostly on the west coast of South America, but after the destruction by Pizarro, right? He was one of these Spanish conquistadors. He came over and stuff, and he basically conquered them and destroyed them, and did the exact same thing as what happened to the Aztecs, right? The northern southern kingdom. Now, that being said, here's a painting of the Inca kings, okay? And you can see they all looked so-called black, okay? And this is why we tell a lot of, Israelites who say that the blacks were already here, that America is that so-called Negroes are native to America. No, they are not. Okay? The blacks that were here that you think are the American Negroes, those were the other tribes. Those are the Northern Kingdom, the so-called Latinos and Native Americans. This is how they look like. Okay? This is how your South American, Indian appeared. Like so-called black people, so-called Negroes. Okay? But they were not of the Southern Kingdom. They weren't so-called Negroes. They were the Northern Kingdom Israelites, okay, of the respective tribes. Now, again, when you go here, you can see how right here, Carlos Quinto, he was the first son of the, after the kings of Peru or Inca. They started going from here, and you can see they started getting lighter, okay? And this here is pretty much the story of South America, right? Basically the Latinos and the Native Americans, okay? Now, that being said, Salakia, I know I'm going long in this lesson, but there's so much to cover for the tribe of Asher just because it's such a huge tribe and there's so many tribes that are involved in it, okay? But again, all this here revolves around those nations that I had spoken about. Now that we've gotten that covered, let's talk about how these Northern Kingdom Israelites got over here to America, okay? And let's explain how those Peruvian Israelites were wrong when they said that they were not the biblical Israelites. Let's explain how they are the biblical Israelites, which is why they have that zeal for God, but unfortunately not according to knowledge. Well, when we get into 2nd Ezra 13 and 40, it tells you about the Northern Kingdom coming over here to the Americas. First going into captivity, and then coming over here to the Americas. It says, 2nd Ezra 13 and 40, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea, the king, whom Salmanasar, the king of Assyria, led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. And that here is talking about when the Northern Kingdom, which again are the really it's 9 tribes, but you also got Levi amongst them, right? Which is why they refer to it as the 10 tribes. Because again, some Levites went with the Northern Kingdom, some Levites went with the Southern Kingdom. Okay, remember, Levi was living amongst all the nations, and though it tells you that, or tells us that Levi got pushed out of the Northern Kingdom because Jeroboam didn't want him to lead the other Israelites away. He still stayed there. A lot of them still stayed amongst the Northern Kingdom Israelites. Now that being said, what we just read was the destruction of the Northern Kingdom by the Assyrian armies. If you want to kind of read a little bit more about what happened, you can go and read the book of Judith, which is found in the Apocrypha. And this is the story when the Assyrians first tried to come up against the Northern Kingdom, but the Lord gave us a little bit of mercy, and he ultimately had destroyed the Assyrians by the hand of Judith, who was a Simeonite Israelite, Simeon being modern day Dominican Republican. But the point being is that right there is talking about when the Israelites got carried away out of the Northern Kingdom of Israel, and then they got taken to the land of Assyria, okay? And amongst Assyria, then we got dispersed amongst the Assyrian land, and that also included places like Ecbatana, or modern day Iran or Persia, okay? You can read about the book of Tobit to kind of read about that, right? Tobit was also an example of how us Israelites, though we were still in captivity under the Assyrians, we had freed ourselves economically, but we were still considered like lower class in the society, and we had basically had to practice our laws or our rituals in secret, right? Great book, read it, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. Now, let's get back to this. Verse 41. But they took this counsel amongst themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. And that right there is talking about when the Israelites, after we had been in captivity for about 100 years under the Assyrians, that the Babylonians came and ultimately conquered the Assyrians. And this is about where you read about the destruction of Nineveh. Okay, you can read about that in Nahum chapter 2. When Assyria was conquered by the Babylonians, us northern kingdoms, we were for the most part free. And as we read, right, we had taken a counsel amongst ourselves to basically go to a new country to keep the laws which we didn't keep in the northern kingdom of Israel. And we really couldn't go back to northern Israel, because what happened is that when the Assyrians took us northern kingdom Israelites, the Latinos and Native Americans, out of that land about 700 AD, he had put in other heathens in that land, right? He had put in, they're known as the Kuthites, basically Persians, right? He had put them in that land, so we really couldn't go back to that land because we'd have to fight them, and we were in no shape to fight. So some of us went down to the southern kingdom of Israel, and you can read about that in the New Testament. You'll read about women from the tribe of Asher and other tribes amongst the apostles in the southern kingdom. But the majority of us, you know, the ones that didn't go into the other parts of the world or the known world at the time, right? You know, around the Silk Road or into Persia and whatnot, we decided to come over here to the Americas. All right, and let's go and read about that. Continuing, 42, that they might there, right, in this new land, keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land, for they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river, for the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Azareth, right? And this blue line here represents that path that the Northern Kingdom Israelites, Latinos and Native Americans took to get over here, right? I believe it's the Navajo have a ancient folklore or folk story that talks about the turtle boats, how we came over in these turtle boats, or how their ancestors came over in these turtle boats, which were basically these boats here, which had, you know, coverings on the top. Okay, and as you heard in the earlier video of this lesson, they said that a lot of them believe that they came over through the frozen up here where Alaska and Russia are, right? They believe that there was a frozen bridge there, but that's not the way we got there. Okay, and the reason that's not true is because there's no archaeological evidence, and most importantly, the Bible doesn't say that. Okay, the Bible says that we came over the waters. Okay, and this is the water that the Lord had to still, because here in this area, the Atlantic Ocean is referred to as Hurricane Alley, and it's very treacherous to go through. Okay, so also you hear about other testimonies from the native indigenous, from their testimonies saying that their ancestors came over the sea from where the sun rises, right? Aztlan, the story of the Aztecs, right? The tribe of Issachar confirms this. Well, that being said, this is how we got over here. Now, this is ultimately was a punishment for us Israelites, okay? And we came over here because it was a prophecy that we would come over here. That prophecy is spoken about here, right? Deuteronomy 28:68. And Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you, which buy really means redeem you. Okay, and that's how the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom came over here to the Americas. And we stayed over here for close to about 2,400 years before the Lord brought over the southern kingdom of Israel, okay? And this is what I wanted to talk about. Because in that lesson that I had talked about, you know, not only did the Lord bring over the southern kingdom of Israel by the Sephardic Jews who had been expelled out of Spain, which these Colombians are referring to, which they very well could be, it's also referring to the North Atlantic slave trade that took place in about 1618 to about 1860. Okay, and this is why down here in the tribe of in Brazil, for example, and where else is it? French Guiana. Around here, you have a lot of Southern Kingdom Israelites. Okay, this is why Brazil, there's many Southern Kingdom Israelites in there, and that's because a lot of them came from Angola and the Congo, and Senegal was all up in French Guiana, Guyana, and all those areas, right? So that being said, this is why Asher has a combination of Asher, but also has a combination of Benjamin in it. But for the most part, South America is Asher's location, okay? And amongst him dwells these other nations. And again, the whole 12 tribes chart, it is a guide. It's not, concrete, right? We're not saying that all the tribe of Ashers are within this geographical spot. No, there's a lot of Asherites who have come to America that have gone around the world, just like a lot of Benjamites who had basically came down here to Brazil and down here to Cartagena and over there to the West Indies and over here to the Americas, right? We are scattered largely all around the world, namely here on the Western Hemisphere. But again, according to the prophecies of our forefather Jacob to our forefathers, his 12 sons, he had told us that we would all be dwelling in specific places. And these prophecies all are explain who we are. And as far as for those prophecies, remember, it told us in Genesis that Jacob, our forefather, gave prophecies to each one of his 12 sons and to let them know what their descendants would be doing in the last days, the time that we're living in now. And in regards to Asher, this is what he said. This is Genesis 49:20. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Okay, so you have this, and then you also have the blessing that Moses gave to the tribes, like towards the time when he was about to move on to glory. Okay, this is Deuteronomy 33:24. And Asher, he said, let Asher be blessed with children. Let him be acceptable to his brethren, and let him dip his foot in oil. So that being said, let's go through these prophecies, okay? So right here where it says, out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Well, this right here is talking about how, they're going to be one of the larger producers of food, okay? When you look at Brazil is basically one of the largest producers of beef in the entire world, okay? This is why they're taking over a lot of the beef industry here in America, right? There's a whole show talking about this, right? Yellowstone. If you haven't watched it, it's a great show. A little too, cornball-y with a bunch of cowboy shit, but a good action show nonetheless. But one of the main themes in that show is that the beef industry is basically dying in America, and it's on its way out, and that Brazil is going to eat the American cattlemen's lunch, right? Because they're the number one producer of beef in the world. Okay. Another thing about Brazil, right? It says the biggest sugar producer in the world. Brazil is the world's largest producer of sugar, accounting for 25% of the global production. Okay, and not only does Brazil create the largest amount of sugar and beef, but the rainforest in general, which is right here, produces a large amount of the food for the entire world. Okay, I think it's like 14% or something like that. So this is what it means by his bread shall be fat, and that he shall create royal dainties. Okay, because remember, one of the big things about, again, Brazil is that, or should I say Asher's, that's right, is that they have this yearly festival referred to as Carnival. And Carnival, besides it, being popularized for all its, parades and its, the dancing women and everything, it's also known for its lavish foods and like all the chefs that go there, and they put on these big elaborate meals, okay? And it's like a festival for kings, okay? So hence royal dainties. So, and then as far as the prophecy that Moses gave about them, right? Let Asher be blessed with children. When you look at again at that map, this area here, there's so many people in this area, especially in Brazil, that it's crazy, right? This is one of the largest regions as far as people in South America, okay? And not only that, but when it says let him dip his foot in oil, when you get into the list of the largest oil production companies in the world, right? Countries by rank. When you look at this here, right? Yes, you have all these other countries, but look down here. Venezuela, 20, South America. Let's see who the next South American country is. Colombia, also Asher. How about what other South American country, right? Argentina, that's Naphtali, but look over here, South America. Guyana, South America. Ecuador, so Ecuador, Guyana, this is Asher. So again, Asher has a lot of oil reserve, okay? So that's what that's referring to. So this is how we know who Asher is, okay? They are the nations that I just spoke about. So that being said, why do these Israelites, these South American Latinos, not know who they are? Okay, well, that's because there was a prophecy. There was a prophecy that we would forget who we were. And this is also known as the Great Falling Away, right? The beautiful thing is that those Israelites in the beginning of this lesson, in that video, they were the Israelites that had not necessarily remembered that they were the Israelites, but they had started, their spirit had started to come back to their old heritage, right? To the ways of their fathers, which is why they were doing, for the most part, they were keeping the Old Testament laws, right? They were keeping the Sabbath. They were doing all these things, okay? Just like those Colombians who were so-called lost Sephardic Jews, right? Unbeknownst to them, they were doing the law, not knowing the law, okay? And what does it say? Those that keep the law, but not having the law are a law unto themselves. And that is happening because the Lord is breathing the breath of life back into us, okay? The Lord is bringing the spiritual skeleton of the dry bones, which was us Israelites, because remember, when the Lord destroyed us, He made us lose our heritage, like it tells us here, Jeremiah 17:4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled the fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. And that's how we lost our heritage, okay? And why was that? Well, because again, we started to go off, right? Because we disobeyed the Lord. We didn't keep our contract with Him. We broke that covenant. And even till this day, we are being destroyed. We're being oppressed, right? Here's images showing what happened to the Northern Kingdom, right? And that all goes back to right here, to the old times when we got first put into captivity and got put into labor camps and whatnot, right? We would basically get our hands and noses chopped off. We get fed to dogs. Our women would have their children ripped out of them, right? Children would they would rip children in half to show how strong they were, right? These devils were ruthless to us, all right? Burning us at the stake. They would take our babies and bash them, their heads against rocks. They would hang and then burn 13 of us representing the 12 apostles and the Messiah. What devils are these, man? See, look at these devils, what they did to us. But again, this is all because this was the punishment of us Negro, Latinos, and Native Indians for going off and not obeying the Lord. But now that our iniquity is accomplished, our punishment is coming to an end, the Lord is now waking us up. He is putting that spirit back in us to cause us to to seek them out again, to seek the truth out, not to get into religion, but to get into the truth of the Bible. And that's what those Peruvian Israelites were. Though they didn't have the full-on truth, hopefully they'll watch this video. Hopefully, well, not hopefully, they will eventually get this truth. It tells you in the Bible that this gospel, which is the 100% truth, which the apostles push out, will eventually go around the entire world, and everybody will get this. And Lord willing, those Israelites will get the true message. Now, those that the Lord wants out of that group will understand that they are the Israelites and that what his name, real name is, and they'll call upon it, right? But again, that's all up to the Lord if he's going to have that mercy on them. Now let's read this. This is Baruch 4 and 6. Ye were sold to the nations, not for your destruction, but because ye moved God to wrath. Ye were delivered unto your enemies. So all this judgment, all that destruction that came upon us, that all happened because we were wicked and we went off, and the Lord ultimately had to cause prophecy to play out. And that's how prophecy, happened, right? Is that we ultimately would go off, we'd go into captivity, we would lose our heritage through the killing, the beating, the perpetual slavery that we were put in. Even till this day, we're in a form of chattel slavery, right? Basically, we're on tax farms, basically working and getting taxes and our labor stolen from us, okay? And that's because we're still in a form of captivity. But again, this is soon going to be over because the Lord is soon going to be arriving. This is Baruch 2 and 30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. And that's what's happening, right? We're remembering that we're the Israelites because we're coming back to our old heritage, right? And that's because the Lord is putting it on our spirits. And he's waking up people like the apostles, right? And even men like the guy who started that Peruvian Israelite movement. Now, he ultimately wasn't right. I think, he went off and said that the world was going to end in 2000, that video, by the way, was before the year 2000, which is why the narrative of the video was talking about the upcoming year 2000 destruction. Now, I wonder how many of those Israelites stayed around, because again, the whole 2000 year destruction was a major shake-off for a lot of Israelites, right? The Lord, swept out the Israelites who weren't worthy, and only those who are true to this truth managed to stay, both down there in Peru, amongst that group, and even up here in Babylon the Great, America, right? You had a lot of Israelites in the One West camp thinking that the year 2000 was the year that the Lord was going to come back, and that ultimately came from the heads of the One West school, right? I think Arya and basically the heads had taught that, and ultimately that got taught down to the lower leaders, and even even our apostles were pushing that, but that was because they were being told that's how it was. But again, that we now know that was a method to get rid of a lot of the hanger-ons and the people who weren't worthy. It basically shook them out. Okay, so enough of that. Let's read this. This is Jeremiah 30 and 3. For lo, the day comes, saith Yahweh B'Shem Shai, that I will bring again the captivity of my people, Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, saith Yahweh B'Shem Shai, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. And that's what we're soon coming up upon, Akim. Right, we have only a few prophecies left, right? The mark of the beast being initiated, World War III kicking off, and then the Lord's going to show up, right? We still have to go through Jacob's trouble, which it is at the door, right? When TJD gets in office, man, that shit's going to, kick into overdrive, because he's going to try to get out all these immigrants. And guess who these immigrants look like? They look like us Israelites, okay? And that's going to be the reason why they're going to bring in the digital IDs. They're going to bring in the reason for you to show your papers when you travel. I think they're saying that to fly in 2025, they're going to require a digital ID. So it's going down, Hakim. This is Romans 13 and 11. And that knowing the time, that now is the high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. So hopefully this video was edifying, Akim. Hopefully I was able to break down the tribe of Asher and how it is the Bolivians, the Brazilians, the Colombians, the Ecuadorians, the French Guianans, the Guyanese, the Peruvians, and Surinamese, and the Ugarians and the Venezuelans, right? So, with all that, let's give all honor and glory and praises to Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Shem Ruach HaKodesh. Shalom.